and welcome to Coffee with Phil, where our goal is to help you live a life of purpose on purpose. We believe that we each become wiser through the people we meet and the stories we hear. So today, we want to connect you with someone new. To help you find the wisdom in today's story, here's your podcast host, Phil Strong.
Well, g'day and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Phil. I'm just loving hanging out with you, and thanks for the feedback. I'm getting all sorts of comments from people who are really enjoying grabbing an episode and listening to it while they're driving in their car, or perhaps some of you are the diligent type that put headphones on, do the dishes, tidy the house, and listen to some kind of practical or positive input into your life. As a person who loves podcasts, I have a growing interest in listening to wisdom. And, you know, I've got to be honest, I'm pretty picky. This morning I was listening to a message or a podcast that someone had shared, a friend of mine. I was interested in the speaker. I grabbed my Bluetooth headphones and listened to the first half an hour. And I looked at what was remaining, and I thought, really, is this a good use of my time? So look, I just want to make sure that I'm always providing you with practical content. I'm trying to provide a really wide range of content. My daughter Grace was saying to me the other day, she's been listening to the podcasts and really enjoying them. And she said, "Oh, the other day, Dad, I didn't realize your podcast was all about book writing, and I'm not sure I'm going to write a book." And I thought, you know what? That's great feedback. Not every episode is going to suit every person. My next couple of guests, I'm pretty excited about. I'm just trying to secure a time and a date, and it's not proving as easy as I hoped. And I really love to interview people face to face, because then there's a connection, and I can really draw out the juice that I know, the good stuff, the gold, the wisdom, and the life-changing stories that they've got. I know I can draw them out if I'm sitting with them. So that's my preference. So I just hope that you're patient and waiting for these to come along. But in the meantime, I was thinking today, what could I share with you? And I decided that I would pitch this story to you. And the concept is, will you play the long game? What I really hope that you get out of this is to consider how you view your choices and whether you bother to think beyond the moment. That's what I consider playing the long game. So I've got a bunch of stories and examples that I want to share with you. I'm hoping this is really relevant to a wide range of listeners. And look, why don't you comment? Why don't you grab a chance to get on Facebook to Phil Strong Author, the page that I'm sharing all my public stuff on. And why don't you comment? Why don't you comment on the post? Why don't you share it with your friends? Why don't you tag some people and invite them to listen? Because truly, I believe we can shift and change the society we live in, the future we're creating, by literally exposing people to these principles of wisdom. So why don't you grab a coffee? I've got mine sitting right next to me. Grab a coffee, let's grab a listen, and I want you to consider how you can play the long game. Let's do it. Well, g'day and welcome to this episode, Playing the Long Game. It doesn't matter what age you are, what age or stage of life you're at. It doesn't matter your circumstances, whether you're married, with someone, single, or considering what the option is for you. I just want you to know that you can make significant choices that affect your future in a significant way. What I want to talk to you today about is what I call playing the long game. It's about having a view of life where you don't just think about the moment. You're not just thinking about, well, how can I make myself feel good now? You're not just thinking, what is the best return in this moment? But you're looking at life, you're looking at your choices, you're overcoming obstacles because you're truly committed to playing the long game. Well, what do I mean by playing the long game? What I mean is making choices today that actually affect you in the future, a long way from now. For instance, you might consider that learning to read was an elementary task, but the rest of your life is affected by the fact that you learn to read. It's just such a simple example, but it has affected the long game. What about saving for your retirement? If you're putting money into KiwiSaver every week, you're watching it come out of your bank account. You're watching it go into your fund. And even now, after the lockdown, after the wriggle and the wobble of the pandemic and the certain uncertainty we have now in the economy, you're watching your fund value decrease. But you've got to play the long game. You've got to understand that the choices you're making today, the investment, the drip feed, the long, slow saving, is having a significant effect on the long game. And when you get to 60 or 65 and you take that money out, you're going to reap the rewards of playing the long game. Those are just two examples. What I want to do today is I want to make it really personal. I always hope that when I'm the guest on my show that I'd pull back the covers and allow you to hear some of the stories in our life and see if you can apply what we've learned as we've led our family, Kathy and I, or as I've made choices in my own life. What I really hope is that you can find something that you can transfer to your way of thinking. So I want to talk today about playing the long game. And I've got 5 examples. So I'm going to move through these relatively quickly, hoping not to stick with you too long today. This is a quick podcast, but one that I think you will be able to think about much longer than the time we spend together. The first thing that I want to talk about is a fun story. In 2009, Kathy and I made a decision to take our kids into Europe. And the fundamental, primary, key reason for me wanting to take my family into Europe, like I'd never been, so it was exciting. But the whole thing hinged around one key point, one key decision that I wanted us to make together. And that was this. Kathy's father was born in Denmark, up in the north part of Europe, freezing cold most of the year. That's probably not fair to say. But he was born in Denmark and emigrated to New Zealand around the sort of 1950s-ish, maybe late 40s. And he came out here, and many of his family ended up coming here, following him, and ended up all of them living here at one point. But he came out to start a new future. And he did. You know, he married a local girl, and they had 4 kids. Kathy is the third of their children. And so he's part of our family. Kathy's dad is part of the legacy of my children. So Kathy's half Danish, which means my kids are 1/4 Danish. But I wanted them to have the opportunity to see where their grandfather was born, to see where he lived, to get a taste for life in Denmark. And that ultimately was the main reason we chose to go into Denmark and Europe. It was fascinating to me to explore how we would get there. We ended up catching the train from Switzerland up through Germany. We stopped in Germany. We went north on the train, and the train went on the ferry to cross over into Copenhagen. So we got off the train in the station. We found a B&B, which was literally a bunk room for the 4 of us, and we were in Denmark. Kathy had been before several times, and she was pretty excited to take us to a local supermarket to find frikadellas and some local bread, and it was all exciting, you know. I remember heading out early the next morning to grab a coffee. I wanted some time to think. I wanted some time to process and prepare myself for what I was about to take my kids into. I remember walking into the city centre, Copenhagen, and grabbing a coffee, sitting on a corner bench inside the coffee shop because it was a bit cold. Thousands of bikes parked outside. Everybody bikes around the city there. And I remember just soaking in the atmosphere and thinking, wow, this is part of my kids' history and heritage, and they're now seeing it for themselves. We travelled, we got a rental car, we travelled west, I guess it is, across the long bridge toll bridge into the other island. We travelled north up and we found the church where Kathy's dad had been christened. In those days, it was really the registration of your birth was when you got christened, and it was written in a book, and it became part of the archives and the history of your family. So we found that church. We walked around the grounds. It was a big old grey building. It was unbelievable to be standing in that place and thinking that, 60, 70 years ago, Kathy's great-grandparents had walked onto that property. It was awesome to find the bakery where her father had done his apprenticeship, qualified as a baker, travelled to New Zealand and was a baker for his entire life. We showed our children the bakery where he would bike to work early in the morning to bake the bread for the community, the village that he lived in. But what was most powerful for me was we managed to find the house where he was born. We found the house on the corner, the little house behind the hedge, and we just walked up and down the streets. We looked left, we looked right, we soaked it in. But the big thing for me, and we still tell this story today as a family, is I remember watching my kids kicking a stone up and down the street like playing football, as kids do. But I just remember having this thought, wow, their grandfather did the same thing. Maybe he was kicking an old can of food, empty can from food, or maybe he was kicking a small rock with his brothers and his sister, but he would have done the same thing. And for me, that was a decision that was really about playing the long game. It was about connecting our children to their past and allowing them the privilege to bring their past into their future. They're 1/4 Dane. And now they can say they've been to Denmark, they've seen the Little Mermaid, they've eaten on the edge of the canal in the cities of Denmark, they've travelled and seen the landscape. But most importantly for me, is they connected with the birthplace of their grandfather, and now they have that as part of their life that they can take forward. So that when they have children and when they have grandchildren, they can tell stories, they can show photos, they might even take their own children to discover those places again and again and again. This is an example of playing the long game. That what would you be prepared to do today that would affect the future generations that follow after you? Maybe you don't even have kids. Maybe you're not even considering the idea of what it would be like to have children. But you have to say that the decisions that you make today will affect future generations. I urge you to consider how you view your choices today, and I urge you to think beyond the moment. The next story I want to tell you is really relating to a practical aspect of our family situation, and I need to be honest about this. We've invested in significant structure to protect and allow accumulation in a healthy and safe way with regards to assets and distribution of family income. So 2003, 2004, I started a conversation with a good friend of mine. Must get him on the podcast. Andrew Clements, he's a lawyer friend of mine, very, very, very talented man. And we put in place a trust structure for us and our family in the way we live. Maybe I'll do a podcast on it one day, but essentially we have a family trust that owns our assets. We have a business trust that generates income streams and distributes those income streams wherever we feel is important. And finally, we have a charitable trust that allows us to have a giving structure that really meets our objectives in being extravagantly generous in multiple different ways. And so this structure has been something that's been in place now for almost 20 years, and it's robust, it's well set up, it's well managed, and it allows us to live through seasons, whether we're in a season where we have a lot, or whether we're in a season where it's like winter and we don't have much going on. This structure allows us to achieve that. Well, I was driving along one day and I really felt this nudge in my conscious awareness to say, well, what about your kids? And I rang my lawyer friend up. I rang Andrew. I said, Andrew, I've just had this thought that really what I'm doing is not just about me. I need to put structure in place for my children as well. I want to initiate the process of setting up family trusts for both of my children. And I remember Andrew was like, "Oh man, oh you're amazing, oh man, that's awesome," and he got quite emotional because he understands my heart behind it, but he also understands the significant commitment that I was prepared to make in investing in the future of my children. So we set about getting the documentation in place. We had signing ceremonies. It was a bit of a big deal for the family. It wasn't really a big deal for anyone else. No one knows what was going on. But the point was that we'd laid foundation stones for the future of our children's family that we can't yet see. It was many years later that Jackson bought his first house, and of course, family trust structures already in place and assets and all sorts of other things that just allowed that process to be cemented for his future. And as Grace walks through the same journey, she too will reap the benefits of what we sowed into her future all those years ago. It's also, it's not just about the money. It's not just about the structure. It's really about the thinking. See, what we've been talking to our kids about, what we've been discussing with them. And I know they're listening to this podcast, so, I'm really stirring them to consider the significance of decisions we make and how it affects or ripples, the effects that ripple through the generations. The teaching, the principles, the wisdom, and the value system that we've been instilling into our children through doing things like this really is about playing the long game. That one day, when my son or my daughter are speaking with their children or their grandchildren, they will be passing on wisdom and principles that they learned from watching what we do. This is truly an example of playing the long game. And everything I do is about sowing into others. I've got my book right next to me because I'm preparing a digital seminar for kids and money. And, the back cover of this book, it says How to Raise a Financially Savvy Generation. This book is a must-read guide for parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, and family friends who want to invest in the financial success of their children. You see, that's my whole motive, is preparing people for their future and laying foundation stones that they can build on themselves, teaching them how to build, encouraging them to build, and then supporting them as they do that. Truly, when we play the long game, other people reap the benefits. One of the things that you're going to have to realize pretty quickly is that when you make decisions, not everybody agrees with you. Playing the long game is about sometimes making tough choices, the right choices to you, that other people might disagree with, but you still stick with it anyway. 2013, I think it was, Kathy and I attended a workshop, a Dream Culture workshop. It was run by a guy called Andy Mason. He's a Kiwi living in the US, but he was in our town, and a friend of mine promoted the seminar. I was like, man, it sounds fascinating. We went along, and this guy, Andy, was teaching us how to access the dreams in our heart and then creating a pathway towards them. His book, Dream Culture, written by him and his wife, Janine, is a really good read. In that workshop, something sparked in Kathy. She uncovered a dream that was buried in her, and it just emerged that night. She was so excited. We were driving home. She says, I know what we need to do. I was like, all right, tell me, hit me with it. She said, we need to take our children to Uganda so they can visit our sponsor kids that we give money to, that we pray for, that we support and write letters to. We need to take our children so they can see how our sponsor kids live. And I was like, whoa, it was a big deal. And we thought long and hard about it. We looked into the cost of it. It was a significant cost to get across to Uganda. We had to raise a lot of money for projects over there, which turned out to be easier than I thought because everybody wanted to be part of changing the social fabric of the village. So that was fun. But we took our kids into Uganda. But it wasn't without opposition. This opposition came mostly from family, people close to us, people that were concerned, well-meaning, absolutely committed to our safety and our well-being, but not in agreement with our decision. How could you take your children there? It's unsafe. What if something happens to you? You could get sick. You could get attacked. You could lose everything. And they're right. It's absolutely true. That is a possibility. But we knew what was important to us. We knew that this dream that Kathy had unlocked was significant for our family. And that there was going to be benefits long term for our children and their children because of the experience that we were preparing our kids for. So we did. We went into Uganda. We said to our family, look, we love you. We appreciate your concern, but we can't turn back on what we know is the right decision for us. And we're willing to minimize the risk as best we can. We're prepared to put in place a lot of safety procedures, and we worked with our hosts to make sure that that we had that in place. We got all the immunizations, thousands of dollars in immunizations, and there's a brilliant photo of Gracie getting the shot in the arm. You know, the needle probably felt like it was the size of an exhaust pipe, and she screamed. I thought the roof was going to come off the medical center. She screamed so loud, this little girl. But you know, it was just one of the things we had to do to make sure we were safe. And you know, they weren't wrong. It was dangerous. We landed in Entebbe, the airport there, the international airport in the capital. And I remember getting off the plane and walking across the tarmac, and you can still see the bullet holes in the side of the building and the windows because of the conflict that had happened at that airport many years earlier. So very, very real danger. But what's my point? Our decision was to invest into our children and play the long game. And that decision received opposition. Now, we respected the family, we discussed it with the family, but we held fast to the decision that we knew was important for us to play the long game. Sometimes when you make a decision to play the long game, you're going to be unpopular, or you're going to lose favor with your friends. You might, in fact, lose some friends. But you have to know what's right for you, and you have to choose to play the long game and not just live for the moment. I remember when Kathy and I had been married for just 1 year. I was really unsettled in work, and I was just feeling like I needed to shift the type of work I was doing. I was climbing the wrong ladder, basically. And the ladder at the corporate world, the ladder gets really narrow at the top, and it's dog eat dog. If you're prepared to kill the other guy, you can get promoted. And it just wasn't what I wanted. And I found an opportunity that was just exactly what I wanted. It ticked like 5 or 6 things on the list. It was perfect. But it was a long way away from home. It would require us to move 6 hours north from Wellington. It would require us to leave family behind and move away. And it was tough. It was a tough decision. But for some reason, we knew it was right. We'd been married a year. We were full of hope and optimism, and we were looking for a fresh start. It had been a tough season in our life leading up to this, and so we decided we would make that decision. And you know what? We've never looked back. It's been the best thing we ever did, even though it was a tough decision at the time. I wonder, what opportunities are before you? What choices are before you that you might be considering? Are you prepared to look at the long game? Are you prepared to play the long game? Make decisions today that don't just affect the moment, but they affect a lifetime. One of the easiest and most practical things that you can do to play the long game is to invest in yourself. This it sounds a little bit simple, and even as I wrote my notes for this interview, I thought, is that really rocket science? But you know what? Most of the success principles in life are not rocket science. They're simple. And people look for the complexity. They look for the system, the 17 steps to success, and ultimately, they miss the simple. Investing in yourself is the best way you can play the long game. How do I make myself a better person? How do I learn more skills? How do I shape my values that are going to be the best way that I can contribute to society, to my community, or to my family? What can I do to find healing from the brokenness that I've experienced in life? How do I learn from my mistakes? Because we all make mistakes. How do I learn from those mistakes in order that I could be stronger and smarter in the future when I come across tough situations? How do I grow personally as a person? How do I become more likable, not to be popular, but to be influential? How can I influence a greater number of people for good? These are questions that someone who plays the long game would ask themselves. What is a weakness that I can work on at the moment? How do I rest well? Who do I need to contact and build a bridge with for reconciliation or strengthening our partnership? I'll be honest, these are questions I've been asking myself just this week. How do I strengthen myself to get to the future that I see for my family, for my community? I'm not going to be able to do it in my current state, nor am I going to be able to do it in my current mode of operating. So I've got to sit down. I've got to ask myself some tough questions, and I've got to make a decision to invest in myself. That requires getting help from others. It requires making some changes around the way that I behave, and the way that I operate. But it's all about the long game. You know, it might look like I'm not succeeding in the short term. It might look like that I've made a choice of avoidance or a choice that's not productive in the moment. But if it's about playing the long game, then that's the best way that I could choose to operate today. I'm willing to make choices and make decisions that affect the long term. Because ultimately, the legacy I leave is not really established in the now. It's established over time. I've got to decide whether I'm willing to play the long game. Invest in yourself. Make a decision. What is it that I'd like to work on? What is it that I'd like to shift? What is it that I'd like to shape in a different way? You know, the paths that have led you to this stage of life, well, they're the history. And you can't change your history, but you can use your history to change your future. And I'd encourage you to sit back, grab a moment, and think, how can I invest in myself? Who can I walk with that will help me to grow stronger? The fifth and final example that I've got in my notes here is one of faith. I'll give you a couple of examples. Kathy and I, for years, have been committed to investing in overseas transformational projects. So like I said to you, we went to Uganda. I sat with our host organization. I said, look, we're going to be there for 2 weeks. What is it that we could invest in that would help to shift their culture or improve the things that the locals are trying to achieve? And I learned very quickly that you don't do things for them, you do things with them. So we raised awareness of some of the projects. We went there with a view to partner with them. The local chief, a beautiful man of wisdom, sat with me and counseled me and showed me how, if we were building a school and we left it there, then it would be the white man's school. And he said to me, when you go, the school will fall to pieces because they want the white man to keep it up. He says, but if they build it with their hands, then they will make sure it lasts for their children's children. So this idea of investing into community, obviously we're passionate about the transformational message of Jesus. And so supporting missionaries and teaching people how to change family life and culture and village life with the message of Jesus is something that I'm really passionate about. And I travel, well, I used to. I used to travel several times a year across into Asia and other countries in order to invest in that kind of work. But you see, that's a long-term game. You don't get a return on that today. You know, we can host an event, we can get a crowd, and we can see people's life changed in a moment. But that's not what I'm celebrating. What I'm celebrating is the breaking of poverty, systemic poverty in a family that shifts when someone chooses a new path for their future. You see, they get locked up in the darkness of their culture, and it stops them from seeing the light and the hope that Jesus offers them. But the moment their eyes are open, the moment their heart is enlightened, the moment they respond and say yes to the person we know as hope, then the pathway for their life is changed, and the long game shifts. Their children and their entire family are brought in to this enlightenment. Their parents, their uncles, their neighbors, their entire village is suddenly woken up and enlightened into the radical, life-changing message of the hope, the grace, and the love of Jesus Christ. It's a long game. When I made that decision for myself decades ago, I had a choice to make. Because at that moment in my life, all my friends were not like that. We had a certain lifestyle that we were accustomed to, and it wasn't really healthy, that's for sure. And, it was just destructive. And when Kathy and I made that decision to turn our backs on that lifestyle, not our friends, the lifestyle, we chose to walk into a church and find hope through Jesus. Our friends they just couldn't believe it. And they said to us, "What are you doing? Like, why would you do that? That's just not on the radar of how we would think you'd live." And I remember at the time just saying to them, "Look, it's actually about finding the best future for our life. And this life that we've been living is not going to lead to the best future." And Kathy and I both made that decision years and years and years ago. We turned our lives around, we chose a different path, and that moment was about playing the long game. It meant that the pathway that we chose for our children and our children's children was full of opportunity, different opportunities, hope-filled opportunities, and decisions that they'll get to make on their own. But we're giving them the best chance to make those decisions. So ultimately, guys, I think if I'm going to talk about playing the long game, the life of faith is the absolute best example. How you can make a decision not for today, but in fact, for eternity. As I wrap this up, I really hope that you've been stirred and challenged to think about the choices you're making in your life today. I really, really hope that you consider how you view your choices and whether you even bother to consider, to think beyond the moment. Play the long game. Play the long game. Make the choices today that affect your children's children's children. Make investments in yourself. Make investments in your finances. Make investment in your family environment that will shift the pathway for those that live with you and live after you. This is Coffee with Phil. I'm really glad you joined me today. Look, I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you like. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google. It's on Stitcher. It's on iHeartRadio. You can grab it on the website, philstrong.com. Make sure you get along there and check out the other episodes. I'd love for you to share it with your friends because ultimately, the more people we can have listening to messages of wisdom and the interviews that I've got coming, I'm so excited. I really want your friends to have access to it. So thanks for your support. Thanks for sharing it. And I look forward to coming again soon and bringing you more thoughts around how we can live a life of purpose on purpose. I'm Phil Strong, and I'm glad you're with me today.